And joining us now for the latest on the Middle East peace talks, Janice Stein, TVO's own foreign affairs analyst and director of the Munk School of Global Affairs at the University of Toronto. Welcome. First time this year for you here.
It is.
Okay.
I was just remarking on the beautiful new set.
It's gorgeous, isn't it?
It is.
Lets me be closer to you, too, which I like. Let me read this to you, Janice, from the Associated Press from a few days ago. Previewing the upcoming talks, U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton said, "There is some momentum after an initial round in Washington on September 2nd, which marked the first direct Israeli-Palestinian talks in nearly 2 years. In an appearance last week at the Council on Foreign Relations, Clinton was asked why those who see little chance of reaching a settlement in the one-year deadline Obama has set are wrong. Quote, "I think they're wrong because I think that both sides and both leaders recognize that there may not ever be another chance," she replied. How likely is that to be true, that there is really not ever another chance if these talks fail?
Well, we never say never, and we never say ever.
Right.
So that's a very categorical statement. But she is really getting us something, Steve, here. There is a different climate now, certainly than in the mid-90s when there was a lot of optimism. There was a lot of talk as this stalemate continued on the ground about the end of the two-state solution. Israeli settlements were growing. The opportunities for a Palestinian state were diminishing. There is a sense, both among the Palestinian leadership and we should say the Fatah leadership in the West Bank, that's different from the Hamas leadership in Gaza. But there is a sense time is running out. And there is that sense, too, in Israel, that if the stalemate continues much, much longer, an independent Palestinian state in the West Bank and ultimately Gaza will be foreclosed.
I want to pick apart that a little bit more in just a second, but before we go there, just a little bit of comparison here. The U.S. has championed and sponsored numerous talks over the years. What makes these different?
You know, the United States has been in the middle of this, my goodness, actively, really, for 40 years, on and off. And it takes a lot of courage and guts for an American president to put his oar in this pond yet again, given the track record of failure. This is something, however, that is connected to a boiling issue, which is the issue of Iran. It's really difficult to separate these two. For President Obama, the ability to muster international support for sanctions is dependent on showing some visible progress.
Do you think they're linked?
They are linked on the Israel-Palestine conflict. So in his discussions with Prime Minister Netanyahu, when he comes to Washington, for Prime Minister Netanyahu, the big issue is Iran. What the president pushes back at him and says, if we want to buy time with Iran, if we want to prevent the nuclearization of Iran, we need to show some concrete progress on the Israel-Palestinian track.
Well, I was going to leave this for a little later, but since you brought the Iranian angle in at this point, I've talked to some people who I think are pretty good sources on this, and they say that Netanyahu has never been more prepared to compromise on the Israeli-Palestinian thing, provided that the United States takes care of Iran, or at least allows the Israelis to take care of Iran.
That's the linkage.
You think there's truth in that?
Yes, I think there is. I mean, there's no question between Israel and the United States. That is the linkage, and those two strings, you pull on one, the other one has to give, and so your sources are correct on that linkage is there. What taking care of Iran means, of course.
Well, it's military. That's what they mean.
Well, no, that's not
the people
clear.
I talk to, that's what they mean.
That may be what they mean. But you know, just as recently as 24 hours ago, there was a discussion. And in fact, what taking care of Iran means is an open question inside Israel as well. But what they do want is U.S. support on this issue. And what Obama has done, which has changed the equation, what Obama has done is make clear that in order to get that support, he can't muster the global support, the Russians, the Chinese, the Germans, the French, and the British, unless he could show some visible progress here. So I think there is an opportunity here, but it's not going to be easy.
In which case, progress is defined how? What are they going to talk about?
Well, that's again what's different about these talks than about the earlier talks. There isn't a lot of room for interim agreements and for partial deals. Everybody recognizes that there's got to be one big package. So part of what's gone on even in the last week, the Israelis want Palestinian recognition of Israel as a Jewish homeland.
As a Jewish homeland.
As a Jewish homeland.
Which they haven't done yet.
That's right. That has not happened, and the Palestinians object because they say that ignores the 1/5 of the population that is Israeli Arab, and also prejudices refugee rights. Palestinians want a total freeze on settlements, and that freezes, there was a freeze in place, it expires the 26th of September, very shortly. And for each one of them, you're saying without that, no deal. So you're already beginning to see the tough bargaining that's going on today, right now, when they're meeting in Egypt.
I mean, we're told that personal chemistry matters a lot in these matters, and it's hard to know if there is much between, Abbas and Netanyahu. Do you see any?
Well, there's actually a triangle here.
Who's the third?
It's Obama.
And Obama as well.
That's right.
Is it Obama or is it Secretary Clinton?
It's both, because they're quite different. Obama sets the big picture, and there was very bad chemistry between Netanyahu and Obama 6 months ago. That's gotten better when they both learned that the deep freeze wasn't really advancing anybody's agenda. There's good chemistry between Obama and Abbas. And actually between Netanyahu and Abbas, it's not bad. In part because I think there is this glimmer that Netanyahu, the hawk, is in a position to deliver in ways that a Labor prime minister absolutely would not be.
Only Nixon can go to China.
Only Nixon can go to China. So if they can get this done, and there's a huge if here, and if you look at the latest public opinion polls that have just come out, Palestinian opinion, Israeli opinion, overwhelming cynicism and skepticism that this process
as there should be,
as there should be, given the track record.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
Okay, let me read this about the. You mentioned the freeze a second ago. Let's talk about this. Palestinian leaders have threatened that a renewal of Israeli construction in the settlements would spell the end of the negotiations. And while Mr. Netanyahu seemed to be seeking a compromise, such as allowing construction of limited scope, perhaps only in certain areas, Palestinian officials made it clear that no understanding had yet been reached. Mr. Netanyahu said on Sunday that after the settlement construction moratorium expires on September 26, Israel would, quote, not build all the tens of thousands of housing units that are waiting in the planning pipeline, but that there would not be zero building as the Palestinians want. Nabil Shath, senior Palestinian negotiator, said that the plethora of statements coming from Mr. Netanyahu, peace now, and others, was confusing, and that the Palestinians were waiting to see the Israeli prime minister in Sharm el-Sheikh. Now, obviously the Palestinians want nothing. And obviously,
no building.
Right.
Absolutely.
And obviously Netanyahu wants to be able to do what he wants to do.
Right.
Is there something in the middle that they can both saw off at and agree on?
That's what George Mitchell and Hillary Clinton are working so hard on. And actually, after this first day in Sharm el-Sheikh, you can see that's the issue that prolonged the talks. They were supposed to leave and go back to Jerusalem. They stayed longer in Sharm el-Sheikh precisely over this issue. This is a really tough one. For Abbas, it's crucial because he has to persuade the Palestinian public. This is the biggest issue where the Palestinian public is concerned. For Netanyahu, he's got a coalition sniping at his back and threatening. And in fact, some of his ministers, as is usual in Israel, have gone right out and spoken to the press, even before the meeting.
They're not much on cabinet solidarity.
They're not much on cabinet solidarity or secrecy for that matter, and threatened, in fact, to break up the coalition if he agrees to a total freeze. So what Hillary Clinton is busy trying to do is find that very small sweet spot. I think it's very small. I think this is a tougher issue than most people think. The experts have all been saying they'll get around it. It's going to be hard, and there's, at the very most, what you're going to get is an agreement to expand the natural size in some selected areas. So there will be some very limited growth, but this is a make it or break it issue.
And the Palestinians could go for that, limited growth in some areas.
It depends. I think you know, the bigger calculus for Abbas is there some prospect of a breakthrough in these talks. If he thinks there's a prospect of a breakthrough, he would do so. And they spent the morning, Wednesday morning in Sharm el-Sheikh, talking, interestingly enough, not about the settlement issue only, but about the big ones: Jerusalem, refugees, borders, issues that have not been on the negotiating table for over a decade, Steve.
Now, of course, I guess from the Israeli point of view, the trouble with trying to find a solution here is that you've got Abu Mazen on the one hand representing, I guess, just the West Bank, and you've got Hamas, which represents the Gaza, and they're not a part of this at all.
Right.
So, you know, can you make a deal with, quote unquote, the Palestinian people when it's so divided like this?
Again, I think for both Abu Mazen and Netanyahu, this is a pragmatic calculation. And I think for Netanyahu, the question is better a deal with Abbas on the West Bank than no deal at all. That essentially then pushes it gives Obama what he needs, which is some diplomatic progress, on an issue which Netanyahu cares about more than anything else, which is Iran and the nuclear program.
It's interesting. That is a key dynamic here, isn't it?
That is the dynamic.
Because for the first time in years and years and years, you know, Palestinian terrorism is not the #1 security threat for Israel today.
Absolutely not. You know, interestingly enough, and here's the perversity. Looking at the data, Steve, this last year where there were no diplomatic negotiations was the year in which there were fewest civilian casualties in Israel related to the conflict with Palestine. So in a year that's officially stalemated, you get quiet. As soon as the peace talks resume, you get several incidents that are calibrated to disrupt those peace talks.
Sure.
But those incidents are not the existential threat for Netanyahu.
That Iran could be.
Is Iran.
You know Yossi Beilin.
Yes.
You've met him, talked to him. Just remind the people who he is.
He was the Israeli foreign minister. He was instrumental in the Oslo process when the official processes failed subsequently.
A dove.
He negotiated what was called a peace agreement, a Copenhagen agreement, which laid out the terms of final settlement.
Okay, here, the reason there is method to my madness here, because I'm about to quote him. And it's one of these, if this is what the doves are saying, what are the hawks saying? If the negotiations fail, Yossi Beilin said in Business Week last month, it will lead to more frustration and deeper skepticism that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict can be resolved. The security arrangement between the two sides, which is guaranteeing the current state of calm, will be dealt a blow and there will be a danger of violent outbursts. If there were even the slightest chance of the talks succeeding, I would say it was worth making one more attempt. However, in this situation, there is almost no such chance, whereas the grave implications of failure are both clear and painful. What do you think of his reasoning?
I think he's making a very important point. These talks are not free. They are not costless. And I think failure will have draconian consequences for both Palestine and for Israel.
Lots of people will get killed.
There will be an outbreak of violence. That's right. It's the aftermath of failed peace processes are really dreadful. So when you look at this from a strategic perspective, Steve, Netanyahu is rolling the dice here in a huge way. We go back to where we started, in an effort to assure U.S. support on the Iran issue, he's put the dice on the table on the Israel-Palestine conflict against overwhelming odds. And if he fails in this, there will be local violence between Israel and Palestine, and the Iran issue will be more difficult.
Okay, but look at the other side as well. If Abu Mazen, as he's sometimes called, Mahmoud Abbas, the leader of Fatah in the West Bank, if he fails,
probably the end of his career.
Certainly the end of his career. He's in his 70s, and who knows, he may see an emboldened Hamas as a result of it.
Absolutely. So the stakes and that's one of the things, you know, going back to the ultimate realist, Henry Kissinger, who said the absence of alternatives clears the mind marvelously. The costs of failure are so big for both Netanyahu and for Mahmoud Abbas. It's in that this slender hope for some progress actually resides.
Okay, let's do one more thing before we bring our other guests out and talk about how things are so sad and disastrous in South Asia right now. The last time these two parties, the Israelis and the Palestinians, got close to an agreement, the United States had not yet attacked Iraq, Hamas was not running Gaza, Iran's nuclear program certainly wasn't as advanced as it was right now. Maybe it was nothing at all. So how do all of those events change the dynamic in your view?
I think actually they make the possibility of an agreement. The word peace process is something I stay away from. That they make the possibility of an agreement greater rather than lesser. It changes the incentive structure for Israel's leaders, and the split between Hamas and Fatah, which is so bitter, it's extremely difficult for anybody who is outside the Palestinian community to understand. The Egyptians have tried now for 3 years to mediate this split and have gotten nowhere. And there is no more painful, bitter split than a split within your own family. For Abbas, having taken the step forward now, if he fails, he is putting at risk the Fatah movement and its future in the West Bank.
They got a year, right?
They've got a year.
You a betting person? You never lose money betting against progress in the Middle East,
That's
unfortunately.
Right. That's right.
So is that your bet?
Well, here's the way I think about it. It's similar almost to the market. When everybody's going one way, the really smart investor goes the other. The skepticism about the likelihood of an agreement is so high in the whole expert community, I'm going to go the other way and say, this may be worth the risk.
I think the expression is from your lips to God's ears.